Welcome to NeoExtropia, an adult roleplay and culture city at Second Life. Here, roleplay intertwines with music, art, creativity, connection, and nightlife as the rift carries voices and stories across time and worlds. I'm Grace Aeon, and this is Tales of NeoX. In this episode, we begin with the first 5 diary entries of Hannah Feaversham, her journey from new Victoria Township into the strange wonders of NeoExtropia. From the records of the rift, where fire and betrayal tore new Victoria apart, comes the voice of one who is carried forward into the age of NeoExtropia. Hannah Feaversham, shaken and disoriented, begins her account of survival and discovery in a city of glass and light. These are her first words.
Dear Diary, it has been a while since I had the chance, or the inclination, to write. Centuries, in fact, as it has turned out. In the aftermath of Miss Frost's murder, I was hesitant to commit anything to writing, for fear of implicating myself and the other ladies of the town who sought retribution against her killers. That episode ended in the most Pyrrhic victory since, I suppose, piracies. The governor, Miss Frost's treacherous brother, and their henchmen surely died in the explosion which destroyed the Desert Hotel, rather spectacularly. In the immediate aftermath of the secondary explosion, from the gas mains, I was later told, something else happened, something quite disorienting, a swirl of some strange energy and a shock the likes of which I had never experienced. I lost consciousness for a brief moment. When I awoke, I and my companions were no longer on New Victoria Street. Rather, we were on some sort of platform, surrounded by immense structures of metal and glass. People, both men and women, in a sort of white uniform ran toward us, but before I could recoil in fear they announced themselves as first-aid workers of a sort. When even Miss Dagger relaxed back onto the ground, I had to conclude that whatever had happened, we were in safe hands for the moment. One of the people, a young man with a most handsome complexion and extraordinarily white, even teeth, helped me to my feet. Well, between the two of us, Diary essentially carried me into one of the buildings. The others seemed steadier on their feet, but they had the steel to commit murder however necessary, while I simply stood by and fretted. Clearly I was made of less stern stuff. Inside, each of us was escorted off for a medical inspection of sorts. There was much reading off of sheets of glass and waving of strange objects. Amusingly, it felt like some sort of barbarian tribal ritual, but clearly their machinery was advanced beyond the imagination of even Mr. Verne. But that thought led me to a short story I had read by a Mr. Wells, who was later revealed to be a woman, writing under her brother's name. But I digress. Of travel in time, and some understanding of what had happened to me began to form. Ironically, that would make us the primitives here. A very stern woman in the same white uniform proceeded to lecture me, reading off another one of those panes of glass, about my utterly unacceptable physical condition. Apparently I was so weak she couldn't understand how I was able to move under my own power. I do suspect a bit of hyperbole there for effect, and that my lungs looked like the inside of a coal mine. That I was ready to believe, but that was only the beginning of a long and vituperative lecture on the dangers of tobacco, which did quite impress me with its graphic horror. The woman, a doctor, it turned out, did explain that we had passed through a rift and were in the future, but not necessarily the future attached to our past, as it were. I did not parse the details very well, still being stuck on esophageal cancer and emphysema. She explained that we would receive instruction directly into our minds, no panes of glass. That would cover the history and culture of our new world, and that we would be assigned someone local to help us in our adjustment. She did something to a string of tubes, and I promptly fell asleep. My dreams were of all sorts of things, the history, politics, and manners of my new world. The rights and freedoms given to women were quite extraordinary, as was the culture's lack of taboos around matters of the body. Thankfully, the Church of the Elder Gods was to be found here as well, but as one of many equal faiths. And women could be found in all ranks of its administration. While my dreams disgracefully lacked a thorough exploration of the time's fashions, much could be inferred, and even in my dreams, I could hardly wait to go explore the world's shops and magazines more panes of glass, as I correctly supposed. Upon awakening, the most extraordinarily beautiful woman I had ever seen was to be found at the foot of my bed, reading off, yes, of course, a pane of glass. She set it down and came over to take my hand. She had masses of pale lavender hair, perfect light mocha skin, and glowing violet eyes that seemed to be some distant descendant of the mechanical eyes some army veterans wore to replace those lost in combat. Welcome to the future. I'm Sidonia Wren, and I think we're going to be great friends.
The rift does not only deliver bodies into NeoExtropia, it strips away old identities and confronts the heart with unexpected truths. In her second entry, Hannah finds her guide, Sidonia Wren, to be more than a guardian. Here begins her first awakening in this new world.
Dear Diary, to continue where I left off, and I find some value in revisiting my memory of those early days, on this, the anniversary of my arrival in NeoExtropia. Miss Wren, no, I knew better. Courtesy titles were rarely used here. Sidonia got me to my feet and escorted me down a hall to a bathroom. She entered with me to explain how the various knobs and dials and whatnot worked, for which I was quite grateful. She remained, clearly intending to watch over me as I showered. I removed the paper robe I was wearing. She took it from me and put it into some sort of disposal chute. Standing naked next to her, I felt the impact of my doctor's words. I felt so scrawny, plain, and uninteresting next to this lavender-haired goddess. I burst into tears. It both helped and exacerbated my pain when she wrapped powerfully strong arms around me and clasped me to her ample and partially bare bosom. I had long known that my eye was much more drawn to the female form than to the masculine, but here, in this woman's arms, I felt a yearning the power of which I had never suffered before. I cried further, clasping onto her with my pale, weak arms. She made soothing noises for a while, then handed me a disposable handkerchief of sorts with which to blow my nose. Upon her inquiry, I babbled an explanation that could barely be called language, let alone something worthy of my education and training. She said, ever so kindly, that here I could have whatever body I wanted. To my extraordinary embarrassment, I found myself replying rather breathlessly, I think I want yours. I knew from my educational dreams that I would not receive a response of shock and revulsion, but my dreams did not prepare me for what came next. Keeping a gentle hand upon me, she removed her uniform, led me naked into the shower, and under the warm water, made many long ignored dreams come true.
Every arrival in NeoExtropia becomes, sooner or later, a story of transformation. Hannah's tale continues in laughter, fashion, and desire as Sidonia leads her from confession to confidence, and the city begins to reshape her in its own image.
Dear Diary, after that quite memorable shower with Sai, as she prefers to be called, we sat in a pleasantly bland lounge with an extraordinary view of breathtakingly tall glass buildings rising from the water, and talked and talked and talked. At any rate, I did. Sai might have inserted a word or two during my occasional pauses for breath. I told her everything about my family, my fascination with fashion, New Victoria Township, the academy, the murders, and quite a few things I had never put into words, even here to you, my dearest diary, nor even in the security of my own thoughts. Her attention never wavered, those artificial violet eyes fixed upon mine. When I finally ran out of steam, she stood and helped me to my feet. Well, it's clear I need to take you shopping. Dear diary, I may have squealed, I felt rather odd going out in a version of the white uniform the people in this orientation centre wore, but I had to admit that it, and particularly the shoes, were extraordinarily, even distressingly, comfortable. As it turns out, Sai has both a wicked sense of humour and an uncommon gift for understanding what people truly want, even when they do not. She owns a nightclub, a venue for dancing, and explained that she was trained for both working with those who pass through the rift and those who pass through the doors of her club, all of whom needed something they themselves often could not articulate. I thought of Vivian, who seemed to do the same in her pub, and somewhat understood. And that was how I ended wearing the top half of crimson armour, knee boots, and nothing else. She took me to a place called R2, rather cryptically, led me into a dressing room, and threw garments at me, each more improbable than the one before. After a few, she said, "Oh no, this is what you're getting," and held up what seemed to be a short tunic of some metallic material. I agreed, by then. Had Sai asked me to turn into a pigeon, I would have cooed and pecked at the ground. I was distracted, diary. Thus, it was only when out on the street and strolling to another shop that I noticed a cool breeze across my rear end. I reached back and touched bare skin. I squeaked and looked at Sai in shock. She smiled back most lasciviously and said, "You have a lovely ass. You really should show it off as much as possible." When in Rome, and Sai thought I had a lovely feature, my overall scrawniness notwithstanding. Ever since, I have favoured outfits which keep my buttocks bare.
In her fourth entry, Hannah's journey spills beyond shopping and passion into the rhythm of the city itself. Among towers, trains, and nightclubs, ancient and new, she learns both the strength of her own body and the depth of her breaking points.
Dear diary, the rest of that first, no, second, I suppose afternoon was a whirlwind of shopping, all for the most scandalous things, with quite a few breaks to desecrate various dressing rooms with our passion. Eventually, she led me onto an elevated train which ran smoothly and silently around the city and thence to my new home. It is modest in size, though quite a lot for a single person, but its walls are glass, its view breathtaking. And mine. We spend the evening looking at catalogues on another of those panes of glass, and Sai helped me order a full suite of furniture, which was delivered within minutes by mechanicals, both flying and walking, who set everything up. The levitating bed was tested most thoroughly. Ahem. Sai was on leave from her club to help me acclimatise, so we spent the next few days exploring the city. I was curious as to where her club was. She explained it was in a somewhat colourful part of town, and that she thought it best I spend a few days in the relative peace and simplicity of my neighbourhood, Port Gynoid, and downtown in the Tripsa Towers district. We did venture into another venue for dancing astonishingly, the Dreadnought. It was the Dreadnought. The logograph was virtually the same. Sai explained that the venue dated back centuries, often moving and changing form, but keeping its identity the same. I gathered she grudgingly respected it, while considering her own venue quite superior. This led into a long discourse on styles of music I had no reference for, but then veered into the respective fashions of the two establishments, and I was fascinated. I begged to see it. Eventually she relented, and we crossed town over to Argent, yes, entirely capitalized. Uncouth variants of typography are quite in style here, a large building of strange geometry some 2 stories high. Even in mid-afternoon it was lively, with dancers out on the floor and people lounging around the sides. It felt much more like the Dreadnought I knew than the open-aired space that now bore its name. Sai, of course, knew everyone, and breezed me through the club, making introductions right and left. She led me out onto the dance floor. Not even our exertion in my levitating bed prepared me for the way she danced, and I understood how she was so strong and lithe. I fear I had another snot-drenched breakdown, there in public. Again, strong arms, gentle words, and a ride home in an automated cab. The next day, I began a regimen of physical training.
At last, a year has passed since Hannah first stumbled through the rift. No longer a stranger, she is now minister, dancer, and witness to Vivian Ravenwood's rise in the skies. Her life, once fragile and uncertain, now belongs wholly to NeoExtropia in all its beauty, peril, and dark delight.
Dear Diary, while I may on occasion refer to events of the previous year, it is time to begin a record of my now ordinary life here in NeoExtropia, though I still long for proper spaces between words. I have completed my course of study at the Dark Temple and am now an ordained minister. My spatio-temporal displacement, thankfully not spatio-temporal, had no effect on my ability to master doctrine and commune with the deep ones. While I often consider taking an apartment in the Gagarin district of Skyport Berry, I do enjoy walking to my ministry at the temple and spending much of my free afternoons in Cafe Helium Gods, the typography, where the proprietress, Miss Aeon, the manager, Cassie holds a table for me much as Vivian did at the well, the first Ravenwood. Vivian. Gods, the year she has had. Whether it was Miss Frost's death or the liberation of this new world, I do not know, but from being assigned work in a tavern in the then utterly run-down Skyport Berry, she quickly rose to commanding an empire of businesses both legitimate and much less so. The new Ravenwood is a gilded temple to the darker passions, the centerpiece of a now immense complex in the sky where once only stood an abandoned monastery and a transshipment. I refuse to write transshipment. That is quite a typographical abomination hub from ships traveling between cities and even worlds, and the city below. She reigns in the skies, and I fear her far more than I ever did poor perspicacity Frost. Perhaps it is another reason why I maintain my house in Stade Port Gynoy. Sai and I see each other several times a week, as I often dance all night. How much my stamina has grown. In Argent, now located up in Vivian's celestial empire. Nowadays, though, we are only occasional lovers. Sociability is her profession, and I confess to enjoying the frequent hookup, particularly in some of the Ravenwood district's seedier alleys. Ahem. But I must fly, or at least walk sedately, to work. We have a maiden to initiate, and I look forward to unholy tentacles, rather than human fingers, deep inside me. I do so utterly love my life here. Next entry. My dearest diary fashion.
You've been listening to Tales of NeoX, stories from the rift in the living city beyond. More voices and chronicles will follow, each revealing another side of this strange and beautiful place. NeoExtropia, roleplay, music, art, and nightlife in one living city.